Historians tell of three great commanders in human history. One of these, admired by Genghis Khan, mentioned by Fatih Sultan Mehmet, and read by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. According to some theologians, his name is also mentioned in the Quran. He is Alexander the Great. So let's start a unique journey into the past together. Sit back and get ready for adventure. When Alexander was youthful, he was instructed to battle and ride by Leonidas of Epirus, a relative of his mother Olympias, as well as to persevere hardships such as constrained walks. His father, Philip, was inquisitive about developing a refined future ruler, and so enlisted Lysimachus of Acarnania to instruct the boy perusing, composing, and playing the lyre. This tutelage would instill in Alexander a long-lasting ardor of perusing and music. At the age of 13 or 14, Alexander was presented to the Greek logician Aristotle, whom Philip enlisted as a private guide. He would consider with Aristotle until the age of 16, and the two are said to have remained in correspondence all through Alexander's later campaigns, in spite of the fact that proof of this is often recounted. Aristotle's impact straightforwardly bore upon Alexander's afterward dealings with the individuals he prevailed, in that Alexander never constrained the culture of Greece upon the occupants of the different locales, but just presented it within the same way Aristotle utilized to educate his understudies. The impact of Leonidas may be seen in Alexander's deep-rooted flexibility and physical stamina, as well as in his expertise with steeds. Alexander is said to have subdued the untamable Bucephalus when he was, as it were, 11 or 12, a long time ancient. Whereas it is evident that his father had an extraordinary affect on him, Alexander himself chose to see his victory as appointed by divine forces. He called himself the child of Zeus, and so claimed the status of a demigod, connecting his bloodline to his two favorite heroes of relic, Achilles and Hercules, and modeling his behavior after theirs. This conviction in his godlikeness was ingraining in him by Olympias, who moreover told him that he was a virgin birth, as she had been marvelously impregnated by Zeus himself. His birth was related with awesome signs and ponders, such as a shining star shining over Macedonia that night, and the destruction of the sanctuary of Artemis at Ephesus. Plutarch composes. Alexander was born the 6th of Hecatombion, which month the Macedonians call Luce, the same day that the sanctuary of Diana at Ephesus was burnt, which Hegesias of Magnesia makes the event of a conceit, bone-chilling sufficient to have halted the blaze. The sanctuary, he says, took fire and was burnt, whereas its fancy woman was truant, helping at the birth of Alexander. And all the eastern seers who happened to be at that point at Ephesus, looking upon the destroy of this temple to be the harbinger of a few other misfortune, ran approximately the town, beating their faces, and crying that this day had brought forward something that would prove deadly and dangerous to all Asia. In spite of the fact that his birth is well archived by history specialists, there's small data on his youth, aside from stories of his intelligence. He purportedly met going by dignitaries around the boundaries and qualities of Persia when he was 7, a long time ancient, his guides and his childhood companions. Alexander's companions, Cassander, Ptolemy, and Hephaestion, would ended up his long-lasting companions and commanders in his armed force. Callisthenes, LC 360, 327 BCE, another companion, was Aristotle's great-nephew and came to the Macedonian court with the rationalist. He would ended up a court history specialist and take after Alexander on his campaign. Hephaestion remained his best and dearest companion all through his life and second in command of the armed force. Of Alexander's youth, the historian Worthington composes that Alexander would have been taught at domestic, as was the custom in Macedonia, and he would have developed utilized to seeing the drinking challenges that were portion of Macedonian court life. But that, aside from that, we know shockingly small approximately Alexander's boyhood. In 336 BC, Alexander's father Philip was assassinated by his bodyguard Pausanias. Fair 20, a long time ancient, Alexander claimed the Macedonian position of royalty and murdered his rivals. Sometime recently they seem challenge his sway. He too quashed rebellions for freedom in northern Greece. Once he'd cleaned house, Alexander cleared out to take after in his father's footsteps and proceed Macedonia's world mastery. Alexander named common Antipater as official, and headed for Persia with his armed force. They crossed the Hellespont, a contract strait between the Aegean Ocean and the Ocean of Marmara, and confronted Persian and Greek strengths at the Granicus waterway. Triumph went to Alexander and the Macedonians. Alexander at that point headed south and effortlessly took the city of Sardes, but his armed force experienced resistance in the cities of Miletus, Mylasa, and Halicarnassus. Beneath attack, however not beaten, Halicarnassus held out long sufficient for Lord Darius III, the most up-to-date Persian lord, to hoard a significant armed force. Alexander's military ability was first famous at the fight of Chaeronea in 338 BCE. In spite of the fact that as it were 18 a long time ancient, he made a difference turn the tide of fight within the conclusive Macedonian triumph, which crushed the Greek-associated city-states. When Philip II was killed in 336 BCE, Alexander expected the position of authority, and with the Greek city-states now joined together beneath Macedonian run the show taking after Chaeronea, set out on the incredible campaign his father had been arranging. The victory of the compelling Persian realm, Worthington states. Homer was Alexander's book of scriptures, and he took Aristotle's version with him to Asia. Amid his campaigns, Alexander was continuously aim on finding out everything he may around the zones through which he passed. He took with him an escort of researchers to record and analyze this data, from botany, science, zoology, and meteorology to geography. His want to memorize and to have data recorded as experimentally as conceivable likely stemmed from Aristotle's lessons and excitement. With a Macedonian armed force of 32,000 infantry and 5,100 cavalries, Alexander crossed over to Asia Minor in 334 BCE to start his success of the Achaemenid Persian domain, overcoming the Persian armed force driven by satraps at the Battle of Granicus in May. He at that point freed, as he expressed his victory, the cities of Sardis and Ephesus from Persian run the show that same year, sometime recently moving on to others in Asia Minor. At Ephesus, he advertised to modify the sanctuary of Artemis, which had been annihilated by pyrocrime on the night of his birth, but the city denied his motion. In 333 BCE, Alexander and his troops crushed the bigger constraint of Lord Darius III, R 336, 330 BCE, of Persia at the Battle of Issos. Alexander went on to pillage the Phoenician cities of Baalbek and Sidon, which had surrendered, in 332 BCE, and after that lay attack to the island city of Tyre. So decided was he to overcome the antiquated city of Tyre that he built a causeway from the terrain to the island on which to mount his attack motors. This causeway, in time, collected sediment and soil, and is the reason why Tyre may be a portion of the territory in Lebanon today. For their adamant resistance, the tenants of the city were butchered, and the survivors were sold into subjugation. His approach with respect to the citizens of Tyre is cited by history specialists, old and cutting edge, as a prime illustration of his heartlessness. In 331 BCE, he prevailed Egypt, where he founded the city of Alexandria. At the prophet of Siwa, within the eponymous Egyptian desert spring, he was proclaimed a child of the god Zeus Ammon. In spite of the fact that he had prevailed Egypt, Alexander was not curious about forcing his claim thoughts of truth, religion, or behavior upon the individuals, as long as they eagerly kept the supply lines open to bolster and prepare his troops, an imperative angle of his capacity to rule vast zones, which was to be ignored by his successors. This does not cruel, be that as it may, that he did not heartlessly suppress uprisings or falter to violently demolish those who contradicted him. After planning the arrange for the city of Alexandria, he cleared out Egypt for Syria and northern Mesopotamia to seek after assist campaigns against Persia. In 331 BCE, Alexander met King Darius III once more on the front line at Gaugamela, moreover called the Fight of Arbela, where, once again confronting overpowering numbers, he unequivocally vanquished Darius III, who fled the field. Alexander at that point moved on to require Babylon and Susa, which surrendered unconditionally without resistance. Within the winter of 330, Alexander walked toward Persepolis, assembly resistance at the Fight of the Persian Doors, protected by the Saint Ariobarzanes, L386, 330 BCE, and his sister Utab Ariobarzan, d. 330 BCE, at the head of the Persian troops. Alexander vanquished this constraint and took Persepolis, which he at that point burned. Concurring to the old history specialist Diodorus Siculus and other old sources, he begun the fire which devastated the main royal residence and most of the city, as vindicate for the burning of the Acropolis in Xerxes' Persian attack of Greece in 480 BCE. This act was said to be actuates amid a inebriated party by Thais, the Athenian significant other of the common Ptolemy, claiming it would be apt revenge for the city to be burnt by women's hands, and she is said to have tossed her burn right after Alexander tossed the primary. Within the summer of 330 BCE, Darius III was killed by his possessed common and cousin Bessus, an act which Alexander was said to despise. Darius III's carcass was treated with the most noteworthy regard, as were the surviving individuals of his family. Alexander broadcasted himself the Lord of Asia and proceeded on with his success, walking into the locale of modern-day Afghanistan. In 329 BCE, he established the city of Alexandria Escate on the Iaxartes stream, crushed the city of Syropolis, and crushed the Scythians at the northern borders of the realm. Between the drop of 330 BCE and the spring of 327 BCE, he campaigned against Bactria and Sogdiana, hard-fought fights which he won as he had each engagement in this way distant. Bessus was captured and executed for his injustice against his previous lord, to send the message that unfaithfulness of that kind would never be remunerated. Alexander established numerous cities bearing his title during this time to encourage his open picture, not as it were as a hero, but as a god, and embraced the title Shahanshah, ruler of lords, utilized by the rulers of the primary Persian realm. In keeping with this status, Alexander presented the Persian custom of proskynesis to the armed force, forcing those who tended to him to begin with bow and kissing his hand. The Macedonian troops got to be continuously awkward with Alexander's clear exaltation and selection of Persian traditions. Death plots were brought forth, outstandingly in 327 BCE, as they were to be uncovered and the schemers executed, indeed in the event that they were ancient companions. Callisthenes got to be one of these when he was ensnared in a plot. Clytus, the senior statesman who had spared Alexander's life at the fight of Granicus, would fate himself in a comparative way. In c. 327 BCE, Alexander would arrange both Callisthenes and Clytus in isolated episodes for conspiracy and address his specialist separately. Alexander's propensity of drinking to abundance was well known, and certainly within the case of Clytus's passing, altogether impacted the kill. Both Clytus and Callisthenes had gotten to be very vocal in their feedback on Alexander's selection of Persian traditions. In spite of the fact that competent, awesome strategy and aptitude in managing with prevailed people groups and their rulers, Alexander was not known for enduring individual conclusions which clashed with his possess, and this bigotry was exacerbated by drinking. Clytus's death was quick. Through a lance Alexander heaved at him, whereas Callisthenes was detained and passed on in restriction. In 327 BCE, with the Persian realm solidly beneath his control and recently hitched to the Bactrian noblewoman Roxana, Alexander turned his consideration to India. Having listened to the abuses of the awesome Macedonian common, the Indian ruler Omphis of Taxila submitted to his specialist without a battle, but the Aspacioi and Asakanoi tribes unequivocally stood up to him. In fights all through 327 BCE and into 326 BCE, Alexander stifled these tribes. At long last assembly, Lord Porus of Parava at the fight of the Hydaspes stream in 326 BCE. Porus charged Alexander's strengths with elephants and battled so bravely with his troops that, after overcoming Porus, Alexander introduced him as ruler of a bigger locale than he had already held. Alexander's horse Bucephalus was slaughtered in this fight, and Alexander named one of the two cities he established after the fight Bucephala after him. Alexander aimed to walk on and cross the waterway Ganges toward encourage victories, but his troops, worn out by the hard-fought fight with Porus, in which, agreeing to Arian, Alexander misplaced 1,000 men, mutinied in 326 BCE and denied to go encouraged. Alexander tried to convince his men to press on, but falling flat to win them over, at last consented to their wishes. He split his armed force in two, sending half back to Susa by ocean beneath the command of Chief of Naval Operations Nearchus through the Persian inlet, and walking the other half on through the Gedrosian Leve in 325 BCE, nearly a full year after his troops had mutinied. His thinking behind this choice, both the delay in withdrawal after the uprising and the shape it at long last took, is still hazy and talked about by students of history. Indeed, in spite of the fact that he had deserted his victory over India, he still delayed his walk to repress those threatening tribes he experienced along the way. The unforgiving landscape of the Forsaken and the military engagements took an incredible toll on his troops, and by the time they come to Susa in 324 BCE, Alexander had supported significant misfortunes. Upon his return, he found that numerous of the satraps he had depended on to run the show had manhandled their control, and so executed them, as well as those who had vandalized the tomb of Cyrus the Extraordinary, RC 530 BCE, at the ancient capital city of Pasargadae. He requested the antiquated capital and tomb to be re-established, and took other measures to coordinate his armed force with the individuals of the locale and merge the societies of Persia and Macedonia. Alexander held a mass marriage benefit at Susa in 324 BCE, at which he hitched individuals of his senior staff to Persian princesses and noblewomen, whereas he himself hitched a girl of Darius III to recognize himself with Persian sovereignty. Numerous of his troops protested this social merger and progressively criticized his appropriation of Persian dress and conduct, which he had influenced since 329 BCE. They questioned the advancement of Persians over Macedonians within the armed force, and Alexander's arrangement blending Persian and Macedonian units. Alexander reacted by designating Persians to noticeable positions within the army, and granted conventional Macedonian titles and respect to Persian units. His troops supported down and submitted to Alexander's wishes, and in a signal of goodwill, he returned the titles to the Macedonians and requested an incredible communal devour at which he feasted and drank with the armed force. He had, as of now, dropped the custom of proskynesis in yielding to his men, but kept on comporting himself as a Persian instead of a Macedonian ruler. At approximately this time, in 324 BCE, his deep-rooted companion, conceivably his darling and his second-in-command, Hephaestion, kicked the bucket from a fever, though a few reports recommend he may have been harmed. The claim that Alexander was a gay person or androgynous is upheld by life stories composed after his passing, and Hephaestion is routinely famous as his darling, as well as his best companion. Historians' accounts of Alexander's reaction to this occasion concur that his despondency was protection. Plutarch claims that Alexander butchered the Causians of a neighboring town as a give-up to his companion, and Arrian composes that he had Hephaestion's specialist executed for coming up short to cure him. The manes and tails of the steeds were cut as a sign of grieving, and Alexander denied to promote another to Hephaestion's position as commander of the cavalry. He abstained from nourishment and drink and announced a period of grieving all through his domain and memorial service customs ordinarily saved for a ruler. In early 324 BC, Alexander comes to the city of Susa in Persia. Needing to join together the Persians and Macedonians and make a modern race faithful as it were to him, he requested numerous of his officers to wed Persian princesses at a mass wedding. He also took 2 more spouses for himself. The Macedonian armed force loathed Alexander's endeavor to alter their culture, and numerous mutinied. But after Alexander took a firm stand and supplanted Macedonian officers and troops with Persians, his armed force supported down. To diffuse the circumstance, Alexander returned their titles and facilitated a colossal compromise dinner. By 323 BC, Alexander was head of a gigantic realm and had recouped from the annihilating misfortune of his companion Hephaestion, who was too rumored to be one of Alexander's gay person male significant others. Much appreciated for his voracious encouragement for world amazingness, he began plans to prevail in Arabia, but he'd never lived to see it happen. After surviving fight after a furious fight, Alexander the Awesome kicked the bucket in June 323 BC at age 32. Some students of history say Alexander passed on of jungle fever or other natural causes. Others accept he was harmed. Either way, he never named a successor. His death, and the ridiculous infighting for control that happened afterward, unraveled the domain he'd battled so difficult to make. Enjoy watching. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and press the like button for the continuation of such content.